He tore open that frozen tarp and found 5 children piled like firewood. The smallest one, barely 4 years old, wasn't moving. Her lips were blue. Her heartbeat was barely a whisper. And when he reached for her, a knife pressed cold against his throat. "Touch her again, and I'll gut you like a fish." This broken, lonely cowboy had every reason to ride away. The storm was closing in. A dangerous man was already coming back. And none of these children were his. But he stayed. And what happened next will remind you what human beings are truly capable of. This channel is home to stories of the Wild West, where love is tested by blizzards and bullets, where mothers fight like warriors, and where strangers become family through nothing but courage and compassion. The most powerful thing a person can do is stop when the whole world tells them to keep riding. If this story touched something in you, drop the name of your hometown in the comments. Let's see how far this reaches. And if you believe every child deserves someone who refuses to ride away, hit subscribe. There are more stories waiting for you here.
It was the horse that stopped things. Silas gave the reins a tug, but old Buck planted his feet deep in the snow and refused to move an inch, his ears pinned back and his breath coming out in big, panicked clouds. "What is it, boy?" Buck just stomped and threw his head toward the trees. Silas pulled his Colt pistol and looked hard into that white wall of fallen snow. There was nothing moving, nothing at all, except for the sound of the wind ripping through the pines like a woman screaming her lungs out. And then he saw it. A wagon. It had no horses, no campfire, no lantern lit. It was just a dead wagon sitting sideways on the trail with the snow piling up on it inch by slow inch. Silas nearly kept on riding. He'd learned the hard way a long time ago that stopping for somebody else's trouble was the fastest way to get your own. He had $4 left from the 12 he'd started with, a sack of flour and some salt pork on Buck's back, and a 2-hour ride home through the meanest blizzard Wyoming had cooked up in a decade. That was plenty of trouble for one man, but old Buck just wouldn't go. "All right then," Silas said, swinging down from the saddle. He walked toward that wagon with his gun raised and his finger ready. He grabbed hold of the frozen tarp and yanked it clear. 5 faces just stared right up at him. 5 children, huddled together under a single blanket that was more holes than it was wool. The oldest was a girl with a big butcher knife gripped tight in her fist, aimed steady right at his throat. Behind her, a boy was making himself big, shielding 3 smaller kids with his own body. "Get on away from us!" The girl's voice was hoarse and broken, but that knife didn't so much as tremble. Silas put his pistol back in its holster and raised both his hands where she could see 'em plain. "I ain't here to cause you no harm." That's what he said, too. "Who's that?" "The man who took our horses and left us out here to die." A cold lump dropped straight to the bottom of Silas's stomach. "How long you kids been out here?" "Since yesterday." 24 hours, in a wagon with no cover, in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard. He looked past the girl at the children behind her. There was a boy, maybe 10 years old, with his jaw set so hard you could see the bones in his face. A smaller girl was clutching a rag doll with both hands, just rocking back and forth. Another boy with darker skin and black hair was watching Silas with eyes that had seen way too much for a child. And there, cradled in the oldest girl's lap, was the littlest one of all. Maybe 4 years old, maybe younger. Her eyes were only halfway open, her lips were turning blue, and her chest was barely rising. "She's dying," Silas said, plain and simple. The girl's knife hand twitched. "She ain't dying, she's just cold." "That ain't just cold. That's a fever. How long's she been like this?" "She was shaking bad this morning. Then she just stopped shaking and got real quiet." The girl's voice cracked a little, but she fought to keep it steady. "She just needs to get warm is all." Silas started to reach for the little one. The knife shot up like a snake. "I told you, don't you touch her. Now you listen to me." Silas kept his voice low and steady. He didn't move a muscle. He just looked that girl right in the eyes, talking to her the same way he'd talk to a spooked horse. Slow and easy now. Your sister's burning up from the inside. I've seen it before. She needs a fire, warm water, and cloths on her chest. Or else, she's got maybe 4 hours left. You can go on and stab me if it makes you feel better, but she'll still be dead before dark. The girl's face just fell apart. Not all at once, mind you. Just a little crack right down the middle of all that toughness. And underneath it all was just a 12-year-old girl who'd been holding up the whole world for way too long. "You got a place?" she whispered. "Got a cabin about 2 hours north of here. It's got a fire and 4 walls." "You live alone?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because everyone I ever loved is dead." The girl just stared at him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his worn-out face must have been the answer she needed, because she lowered that knife. Not all the way down, but enough. "I'm Hannah. Hannah Ruth Dawson." She nodded her head toward the others. "That's my brother Sam, my sister Clara, and my little sister Nettie." Her eyes shifted to the dark-haired boy. "And that's Joe. He ain't our blood, but he's one of us. Silas Mallister. Silas, we can get to know each other proper once your sister's not dying. Can you move?" "We can all move. All of us but Nettie." "Then let's move now." Hannah wrapped Nettie up tight in the blanket and held her out. Silas took the child and felt a wave of heat coming right through the cloth, like a brick fresh from a fire. She didn't weigh a thing. Just bones and fever and a little heartbeat that was fluttering against his chest like a trapped bird. He carefully tucked her inside his big coat, right up against his skin. Her little head drooped onto his shoulder, and her fingers, weak as a moth's wings, curled up into his shirt and held on. Something broke wide open inside of Silas's chest. It was a door he'd nailed shut 6 years ago, back when he stood over 2 fresh graves and swore he'd never again hold anything small and precious. "Don't you die on me," he whispered to the child. "You hear me? Don't you dare." He turned to the others. "Sam, can you ride a horse?" The boy's jaw was still clenched up tight, but he gave a nod. When he spoke, the words came out all broken and choppy. Yes, sir. I can ride." "Good. You get on the horse. Clara, you get up in front of him. Joe, you get on behind." Sam was the first one to move. He lifted Clara down from the wagon. The little girl held onto her rag doll with one hand and gripped her brother's coat with the other. "Rosie's scared," Clara whispered. "You tell Rosie I got her," Sam said. He swung himself up onto Buck's back and pulled Clara up in front of him. His arms wrapped around her, steady and strong. That stutter may have lived in his mouth, but his hands knew exactly what to do. You could tell this boy had been holding things together with those hands for a long, long time. Joe climbed up behind Sam without saying a word. He moved like a wisp of smoke, all quiet and fast, and he settled onto that horse like he was born there. His right hand came to rest on the bone-handled knife he wore at his belt. Cheyenne steel, his mama's blade. "You ridden before?" Silas asked him. "My mother's people don't walk when they can ride." "Good. You keep those 2 steady. This trail's going to be rough." Joe just lifted his chin and gave one single nod. No wasted words on that one. That just left Hannah. She was standing there in the snow, her boots already soaked clean through, with that butcher knife now tucked in her belt. She looked back at the wagon, at every last thing she was leaving behind. Then she looked straight at Silas. "If this is some kind of a trick, I want you to know that I will find a way to make you pay for it. Even if I'm small, and even if it takes me years. It ain't a trick. Then let's get going before my sister runs out of time." They started moving right into the heart of the storm. Silas went first, breaking the trail, his boots sinking into snow that came up past his knees. Hannah walked right in his footprints to save her strength. She was smart. The kind of smart you only get from learning the hard way that wasting energy can get you killed. Little Nettie burned hot against his chest. Every few steps, Silas would check her breathing. It was still there, shallow and wet, but it was there. "Tell me about the man who left you," Silas said. Hannah didn't answer for a minute. When she finally did, her voice was flat. It was the way folks talk when the feelings are too big to let out, so they just lock 'em in a box and talk around the edges. His name is Victor Crane. He found us right after Mama died. Said the law gave him rights over orphan children. He had papers and seals and everything looking official. What happened to your folks? Pa got shot by some highwaymen outside of Cheyenne. All for $14 and a pair of boots. That's all my father's life was worth. She stopped for a breath. Mama kept us going for 3 more weeks. Then the fever got her. She died holding Nettie's hand. And Nettie, well, she hasn't said a single word since that day. Silas looked down at the silent little girl against his chest. She wasn't born without a voice. She was grief-mute. A 4-year-old who watched her own mama die and decided this world wasn't worth talking to anymore. Crane showed up 2 days after Mama passed, Hannah kept on. He was all smiles and promises. Said he ran a home for children. Said we'd be safe there. But Joe heard him talking to another man that first night, talking about how much children go for at the mining camps, how the little ones can fit down in the narrow shafts, how the crippled ones and the quiet ones cost less because nobody's going to fight for 'em. Silas's hand tightened on Buck's reins so hard the leather groaned. He had a book, Hannah said. It was black leather, just like his coat. He wrote all our names down in it, and next to each name he wrote down a number. I saw mine, $40. Clara's was $30. Sam's was $20, because of his stutter. Joe's was $15, because he's half Indian. Her voice got real quiet then. Nettie's was $5. $5. $5 for my sister's life. That's what he figured she was worth. A little girl who can't talk and can't work. $5 or just leave her on the side of the road and save on the food. Silas stopped walking. The snow was falling all around them, thick and silent. For a second, the only sound in the world was the wind and Nettie's ragged little breath. He ain't getting any of you, Silas said, his voice like iron. Hannah looked up at him. You don't even know us. I know enough. And what do you know? That we're 5 mouths you can't afford to feed? That this Crane fella has papers and the law on his side? That taking us in is just going to make you a target? I know your sister is worth more than $5. I know your brother holds his family together at 10 years old. I know that boy up there is carrying his mother's knife because it's the only piece of home he has left. And I know you've been fighting for them since the day your daddy died. And you ain't stopped fighting, not for 1 single second. Hannah's eyes filled up with tears. She blinked hard once, twice, 3 times. Then she just turned her head and kept on walking. They didn't say another word to each other for a long, long time. The storm just pressed down on them, the air getting colder as the light began to fade. And from up on the horse, Clara's small voice drifted back through the wind. I am freezing. Rosie is freezing too. We are almost there, little one. You say that over and over because it is always true. Sam's voice followed, sounding a bit more solid. Silas. Joe figures this storm has another 2 days left in it. Silas glanced back at Joe. How can you be so sure? The wind has changed, coming from the northwest now, and the snow is turning finer. My mother could tell what a storm was doing just like your people can tell time. Joe took a breath. She was never wrong. In that case, we had better pick up the pace. The cabin appeared through the snow like an apparition. Its dark logs stood out against the white landscape. A thin line of smoke still curled from the chimney, where the fire from the morning was still barely alive. Silas had never felt so happy to see that run-down stack of wood in all his days. Is that the place? Clara questioned. That is the place. It is awfully small. It is also awfully warm. He carried Nettie inside first, placing her on the bed nearest the fireplace, added more wood to the glowing embers, and fanned them with his breath until the flames sparked and grew. Hannah was right there with him. The water bucket is by the door. We need a cloth. The chest in the corner has cotton shirts. Just tear up what you need. Hannah went about her work as if she had done it 1,000 times before. She located the shirts, ripped them into long strips, filled the cooking pot, and set it to hang above the fire. Her hands remained perfectly steady. Her expression was like stone. She had pushed all her feelings down behind that iron will of hers and simply got to work. She carefully removed Nettie's soaked clothing and laid a warm cloth on the little girl's chest. Nettie's eyelids flickered open for a moment. Her arm reached out and took hold of Hannah's wrist. She did not squeeze, she just held on. Even while burning up with fever, even while drifting somewhere between this life and whatever comes next, she still reached for her big sister. "I am here," Hannah whispered softly. "I am right here with you, Nettie. I am not going anywhere." Sam led Clara into the cabin. The small girl was shivering so badly that her teeth chattered, making it impossible for her to speak. Instead, she lifted her doll and made it give a little wave to the room. Sam inspected the door, then the window, and then scanned the corners. He mentally noted every way out, every dark shadow, and every spot a danger might hide, just like a soldier clearing a room. 10 years old and already conditioned for threats. "The room is secure," he said in a low voice, and then seemed to catch himself. He looked a little embarrassed. "You're a good man," Silas told him. "Barns is outside, and the horse could use some grain. Second stall on the left." Sam stood up straighter. "Yes, sir." He walked out without a second thought. Joe was the last one to enter. He shut the door tight, leaned his back against it, pulled out his knife, and slid down to sit. His gaze swept around the room one time, then locked on Silas, watching him, taking his measure. "Are you planning to sit there the whole night?" Silas asked him. "Someone ought to watch the door. You are only 9 years old. My mother took down a wolf when she was 9. Your age is not what counts. Being ready is what counts." Silas looked at the boy, a child who straddled 2 different worlds but was not truly accepted in either one. Cheyenne blood and white blood were mixed inside a boy that both sides had turned their backs on. He had been cast aside by every person who should have welcomed him. Yet here he was, still on his feet, still willing to fight, still standing guard at the door. "Your mother sounds like a woman I would have been honored to know." Joe's grip on his knife handle got tighter. "She was the most powerful person who ever walked this earth. I have no doubt about that." Something in Joe's expression changed. It was not quite trust, not yet, but it was the tiniest little crack in his defenses. It was the very first signal that maybe, just maybe, this strange man was not like all the other white men who had looked at Joe and saw something not quite human. Silas put a pot of beans and salt pork over the fire to warm up. It was not nearly enough food for 6 people. It was not even close to being enough, but it was hot. And at that moment, being hot was the only thing standing between being alive and being dead. Clara sat down on the floor near the warmth of the fire, clutching her doll tightly. "Rosie would like to know if we are going to stay here." "And what would Clara like to know?" The little girl peeked out from behind her doll's head. "The same thing. You will be staying here for the night. That is the only thing I can promise you." Sam says that promises are just pretty words that people say right before they leave you. Those words struck Silas like a kick from a mule. He got down on one knee to be at Clara's eye level. "Sam has been disappointed by the wrong kind of people, and so have you. I cannot change what happened before. But I can promise you this. Tonight you will have food in your belly. Tonight you will be warm, and tonight no one is going to come through that door meaning to do you any harm. But what about tomorrow? Tomorrow, I will make you the very same promise." Clara considered this for a moment. Then she raised her doll. "Rosie says, 'Okay.'" Rosie is a very smart girl. They shared the meal. Silas took the smallest chair for himself, and no one questioned it because Hannah noticed and understood, and the other children took their cue from her. Sam returned from the barn, smelling of hay and horses, and took a seat close to his sisters. He ate his food with only one hand. His other hand never left Clara's shoulder. "That horse, Buck, he pushed his nose right into my chest," Sam said. "He just stood there, his breath warm on my coat. Nothing has ever been that gentle with me before." He is a fine horse. He is better than most people. Most of the time, anyway. Yeah. After they finished eating, Hannah replaced the compresses on Nettie's chest. The fever remained steady. It did not get worse. It did not get better. The little girl's fingers were still wrapped around Hannah's wrist. That small connection was the only anchor keeping her tethered to life. "She is going to need a doctor," Hannah said in a low voice. "The closest doctor is down in Elk Creek, a good 10 miles away. We cannot make that ride in this kind of weather, so we do nothing but wait. We wait. We keep changing the cloths. We keep her warm." Silas sat back down in his chair and looked straight at Hannah. "You have had to do this before. My mama got sick 3 different times while we were on the trail. I was able to nurse her back to health the first 2 times. Hannah's voice was completely flat. "The 3rd time. Nothing that I did for her was enough. That is not something you should blame yourself for. I am aware of that." But the way she spoke made it plain she did not believe it. Not in the place deep down where it really counted. The cabin grew quiet. The only sounds were the fire crackling, the wind howling outside, the sound of Nettie's labored breathing. Joe sat with his back to the door, his knife resting on his lap, his eyes wide open, always watching. Sam was lying on the floor with Clara curled up right beside him. The little girl had her doll held up close to her ear. "Rosie says that she can hear the wind talking." "And what is the wind saying?" "She says it is telling us that we are all going to be all right." "Well, then it must be true." Clara shut her eyes. Within a few minutes, she was fast asleep. Sam stayed awake for a while longer, his hand still resting on her shoulder, his gaze shifting back and forth from the door to the window. Then he, too, finally drifted off. Hannah sat on the floor right next to Nettie's bed. She had not stopped moving since the moment they had arrived. She had not rested. She had not let her guard down. She had not let herself be a 12-year-old girl. She looked over at Silas, and in the warm glow of the fire he could finally see the deep exhaustion she had been hiding from everyone. "You can get some sleep now," he told her. "I cannot." "And why is that?" "Because if I let myself close my eyes, I will just wake up and find out this was another lie. Just another man who promised us safety but really meant something else entirely. I mean it when I say you are safe. Prove it to me." "How?" Hannah bent down and retrieved her knife from the spot on the floor where she had placed it. She offered it to him. She held it out, handle first. "Take this. If you are truly the man you claim to be, you will not need me to be unarmed to feel secure. And if you are not the man you claim to be, then I have just handed you the only real leverage I had." Silas looked from the knife to Hannah's face. He reached out his hand and gently pushed the blade back in her direction. "You keep it. A girl your age should always keep a knife handy, especially when she's around men that she does not know yet." Hannah's chin quivered. It was only for a second. She quickly steadied it and held it firm. But that one brief shake spoke volumes more than any tears ever could. She slipped the knife back into her belt. "My mama would have taken a liking to you," she said. "I reckon I would have liked her too. Any woman who could raise a daughter like you had to be something truly special." Hannah turned her attention back to Nettie, and for the very first time since he had come across them, Silas saw her shoulders relax. Just a tiny bit, but it was just enough to signal to him that a small part of the heavy burden she was carrying had been shifted. It was not gone, not by a long shot, but now it was being shared. Silas did not go to sleep. He remained in his chair, with his Colt pistol resting on his lap, and watched the fire burn low. Then he would build it back up, only to watch it burn down once more. Sometime around 2 in the morning, Nettie's breathing started to change. It became less strained, much smoother. The congested rattle in her chest began to fade away. Her tight hold on Hannah's wrist finally eased as her small body sank into something that resembled a true, restful sleep. "The fever is starting to break," Hannah said. And for the first time that night her voice trembled. "She is a tough little girl. She is all I have left in this world. That is not true anymore. Hannah did not say anything back, but she did not try to argue with him either. At 3 in the morning, Clara woke up screaming. There were no words, just a raw animal sound of terror that tore through the cabin silence and brought Joe leaping to his feet with his knife raised and Sam sitting bolt upright with his fists clenched. Clara was sitting on the floor, her eyes wide with fear, staring at something that was not really there. "The man," she choked out. "The man who wears the black coat. He is on his way. He is on his way to take us all back." Silas moved to her side and knelt in front of her. "There is nobody here, Clara. It is just us. He is coming. He always comes back. He put our names down in his book, and he promised he would find us no matter where we went. Then let him come." Silas's voice was quiet and firm. "Let him walk right up to that door. He is about to find out what happens when a man makes the mistake of trying to take something that belongs to me." Clara's frantic eyes finally came to focus on his face. "You would have to fight him, sweetheart. I would walk through a sea of fire for any single one of you. And I have been there before. The devil himself knows me by name." Clara climbed right into his lap. She buried her face in his chest and circled her arms tight around his neck. And Silas held her, just like he used to hold Lily on those nights when thunder rattled their little cabin and the world seemed too big and mean for a little girl to handle all by herself. "Tell Rosie," Clara whispered into the fabric of his shirt. "We are going to be all right, Rosie. I give you my word." Sam watched them from his spot on the floor. His jaw was set hard, his hands still balled into fists, but his eyes were shiny with tears. He swiped at them quickly, hoping no one would notice. Joe noticed, but he looked away, giving the boy that small piece of his pride back. Clara drifted off to sleep right there in his arms. Silas carried her over to Sam and laid her down as gentle as he could. Sam pulled her in close, not saying a word. His hand found hers in the dim light, and he held on tight. Joe leaned his weight back against the door. His eyes met Silas's across the dancing firelight. "You meant all that," Joe said without speaking. "What you told her. Every last word. My mama used to say, you can see a man's true heart by what he does when he thinks no one is looking. She said, the ones who are gentle with children and animals, those are the ones you can put your trust in." Joe took a breath. She also said, "Trust is not given. It is earned over time. Your mother was a wise woman. She was right most of the time." Joe rested his head back against the wooden door. The hand holding his knife loosened just a little, and his eyes finally closed for the first time since they had all arrived. Silas sat there in the near dark, with 5 children breathing softly under his roof. The littlest one's fever was finally breaking. The oldest one's tough shell was starting to crack. There was a boy who stammered but never backed down. There was a girl who talked to her doll because the world was just too frightening to face without a trusted friend. And then there was a boy who carried his dead mother's knife and his living mother's wisdom, and he refused to let go of either one. That was 5 children he surely could not afford. 5 more mouths that he had no way to feed. 5 young lives that would make him a target for every crooked lawman and child trafficker in the whole territory. Catherine would have welcomed them in without a moment's hesitation. She would have had them fed, warm, and even laughing within an hour. She would have known just what to do, just what to say, and just how to make 5 broken children feel like they were whole again. Catherine had always been the strong one between them. Silas was just the lucky man who got to stand right beside her. He glanced at the 2 graves he could just make out through the window. Snow covered them completely now, just 2 white mounds in the deep darkness. For 6 years, he had been slowly dying in this cabin. 6 years of drawing breath without really living, of eating without tasting anything, of waking up each morning and wondering what the point of it all was. Now, he finally knew why. It was not because he deserved another chance. He did not believe in things like that. It was because 5 children were freezing to death out on a trail. Somebody had to do something. Somebody had to be the man who did not just ride on by. And whether it was God or fate or just plain dumb luck, Silas Mallister was put on that trail at that exact moment, and his horse had simply refused to take another step. And so here he was. Here they all were. The fire in the hearth burned down to glowing embers. The storm howled outside, and somewhere out in it, a man by the name of Victor Crane sat inside a warm saloon, ticking off names in a black leather book, adding up what 5 missing children were worth to the kind of men who paid him. Crane would come looking for them. Silas was dead certain of that. Men who dealt in the lives of children did not just write off their property. He would come armed with official papers and shiny badges, and every kind of weapon the law could provide a man who knew how to twist it. Let him come. Silas checked his Colt revolver. 6 rounds were in the cylinder, and a box of 20 more was tucked away in his saddlebag. His hands did not shake. His mind was sharp and clear, and for the first time in 6 long years, he had something that was worth defending. He pulled his chair a little closer to the fire and settled in for the long, dark hours until the dawn. Tomorrow, the storm would still be roaring. Tomorrow, he would have to figure out how to feed 6 people on only $4. Tomorrow, the entire territory would find out that a broken-down rancher had taken in 5 orphans, and every bit of trouble that news could stir up would start heading straight for his door. But all of that was for tomorrow. Tonight, these children were warm. Tonight, they were safe. Tonight, a 4-year-old girl's high fever was finally coming down, and a 12-year-old girl had put her knife away, and a boy who never shed a tear had let himself cry, and another boy had closed his eyes, putting his faith in a stranger to guard the door. And tonight, inside a cabin that had been nothing more than a tomb for 6 years, Silas Mallister heard a sound he thought he would never hear again. It was the sound of children breathing in their sleep. It sounded like the entire world was starting all over again. The storm kept them snowed in for 2 days, exactly like Joe predicted it would. Silas rationed out the beans and salt pork into tiny portions, splitting everything 6 ways and then lying about having already eaten when Hannah noticed him skipping his own meals. "You have not touched your plate," Hannah said on that second morning. "I ate before you all woke up." "No, you did not. The level in the pot is the same as it was last night. Are you keeping track of my supplies now? Someone has to. You will starve yourself trying to feed us. And what happens then? A dead man is not much good to anybody." Silas looked straight at this girl who was far too sharp for her own good and much too old for her years. "Eat your breakfast, Hannah. You eat yours first." They had a silent standoff across the small cabin. Sam watched them from the corner, chewing his food slowly, trying to make himself as small and invisible as children do when grown-ups get that tight sound in their voices. Clara held up her little doll. "Rosie says you should both eat your food." Silas finally took a spoonful of beans. Hannah took one as well. Neither of them broke eye contact. "Stubborn old man," Hannah mumbled under her breath. "Stubborn little girl. I got it from my mama. She taught you well." Nettie's fever finally broke on the second night. She opened her eyes and just looked around the cabin as if she had never seen 4 walls before. Hannah was right by her side in a flash, feeling her forehead, checking her breath, and counting the beats of her pulse just like their mother must have taught her. "She feels cool, Silas. She feels cool to the touch." Silas walked over to the little bed and gently laid his own hand on Nettie's forehead. The intense heat was gone. What was left was clammy, damp skin and a pulse that was weak, but it was steady. The child just looked up at him with gray eyes that seemed to hold nothing at all. There was no fear, no relief, just a vacant space where a 4-year-old's world was supposed to be. "Hey there, Nettie," he said in a soft voice. "Welcome on back to us." Nettie just stared at him. Her lips did not move a bit. Her face did not change, but her small hand slid out from underneath the blanket and found his finger, and she held on tight. Hannah made a little sound, a tiny choked noise that she quickly swallowed before it could turn into a real sob. She has not reached out for anyone since Mama passed away. Not even for me. She is reaching now. Why for you? She does not even know who you are. Silas did not have a good answer for that question. He just sat there while a silent little girl held onto his finger and stared up at him with eyes that had seen far too much and had decided to stop looking altogether. After a little while, Nettie's grip went slack and she fell back into a deep sleep. It was a real sleep this time, the kind that mends you instead of just burns you up. On the third morning, the storm finally gave up. Joe had called it an hour before sunrise. "The wind is shifting," he had said. "We will see the sun by noon." And by the middle of the morning, the sky cracked open, a brilliant and cold blue. The snow lay 3 feet deep all across the valley, glittering so brightly that it almost hurt your eyes to look at it. Silas stood in the doorway doing some hard arithmetic that he did not like one bit. $4, 6 mouths to feed, a child who needed a real doctor, and 5 children who needed every single thing he did not have. "I have got to ride into Elk Creek," he told Hannah. "The town is about 10 miles south of here. I need to get some supplies, and Nettie needs for Doc Harlan to take a look at her." Hannah's face immediately tightened up. "You are leaving us?" "I am going into town. There is a big difference. Is there really? I will be back long before it gets dark." That is what Pa said when he went to sell the horses in Cheyenne. He never came back either. "Your Pa was killed by highwaymen. I am riding to a general store. And what if Crane is there?" The name just hung in the air between them. Silas had been thinking about Crane for 2 solid days, turning the man over and over in his mind like a heavy stone he could not set down. A man with a black leather book who wrote down children's names right next to dollar amounts. A man who would leave 5 kids to die in a blizzard and write them off as damaged goods. If Crane is there, then that is his problem to worry about, not mine. "Take Joe with you," Hannah said suddenly. Joe looked up from where he was sitting and cleaning his knife. "I will go. You are only 9, Silas told him. "And I have traveled more miles than most grown men in this territory. I know how to watch the road. I know how to see trouble long before it ever sees you." Joe slid his knife back into its sheath. "My mother always said, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and she never rode anywhere by herself." Silas took a long look at the boy. Beneath that hard outer shell and those carefully chosen words, Joe was asking for something. It was not just for permission, it was something much deeper. He was asking to be trusted, to be seen as someone capable, to be treated like something more than the half-breed cast-off the world had decided he was. "Go saddle your horse," Silas said. Joe was moving before the words had even finished leaving Silas's mouth. Hannah pulled Silas to the side while the others were not paying attention. "If something happens to you, what are we supposed to do?" "Ain't nothing gonna happen. Just answer my question." Silas reached inside the chest and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. "My neighbor's name is Thomas Consincade. The old Tom Ranch is about 3 miles northeast of here. You just follow the creek. This here paper has his name on it. You get to him and he'll help you." "You trust him with your life?" "That's your life I'm talking about. I'm asking about ours. With your lives, too." Hannah took the paper. She didn't even glance at it, just tucked it deep inside her dress, right against her skin. "Be back before it gets dark." "I will." "Promise me, Silas." "I promise." "Well, I'm choosing to believe you. Don't you make me regret that choice." Silas and Joe rode out under a sky so blue it looked like it was painted on. The snow made a crunching sound under Buck's hooves. Joe sat there behind Silas with his knife on his belt and his eyes moving all the time, just scanning the tree line, the ridges, and the trail behind them. "You always this watchful?" Silas asked him. "You tend to stay alive longer when you pay attention to things." "That's a fair point." They rode on for a spell without a word. The mountains rose up all around them, huge and white. And the trail was cut through big snow drifts that Buck just shouldered his way through, patient like a horse who had seen far worse. Silas? Yeah. When we get to town, people are going to see me and they're going to have their opinions. Folks always have opinions. About my blood, about my mother's people. Most towns I've been through, they look at me like I'm something they need to scrape off the bottom of their boots. Silas twisted around in the saddle to get a good look at the boy. What do you want me to do about it? Nothing. I can handle myself. Just don't you act like it isn't happening. My mother used to say the worst kind of white man ain't the one who hates you right to your face. It's the one who stands by and watches it happen and pretends like he don't see a thing. Your mother was a wise woman. She was the wisest person I ever knew. Then I'll tell you what. Anyone in that town even looks at you the wrong way, they'll have to answer to me. Not because you can't handle yourself, mind you, but because you shouldn't have to. Not while you're riding with me. Joe was quiet for a good long while. Then he said, real soft, my father was a white man. He told my mother he loved her. Then he left before I was ever born, and he never came back. Every white man I've met since has been some kind of version of him, always saying one thing and doing another. Well, I ain't your father. No, you're not. Joe paused for a moment. You're something I haven't quite figured out yet. Take your time. Elk Creek finally appeared as they came around a bend in the trail. A little cluster of buildings was huddled down in a valley, looking like they were all trying to stay warm. Main Street, if you could call it that, had a general store, a saloon, a church with a steeple that leaned just a little to the east, a sheriff's office, and a livery stable. Maybe 40 buildings in all, and most of them looked like they would give up and fall over if a hard wind blew. Silas tied Buck up outside the general store and pushed open the door. The warmth that hit him felt like a solid wall. A potbelly stove glowed cherry red right in the middle of the room. Shelves lined every single surface, packed tight with cans and cloth and tools, and just about everything a frontier town would need to pretend it was civilized. Behind the counter stood a woman, 58, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that didn't miss a single thing. Margaret Holloway. Maggie. She had run this store ever since her husband died 8 years back, and she ran it a whole lot better than he ever did. Silas Mallister, I haven't laid eyes on you since October. Been busy. Busy dying of loneliness is what I hear. Maggie's gaze shifted over to Joe, who was standing just inside the doorway. She looked at the boy the same way she looked at everything. Straight on, without so much as a flinch. And who is this? Name's Joe. He's with me. I can see that much. Are you hungry, Joe? Joe blinked. Whatever he thought would happen walking into a white woman's store, it surely wasn't that. Yes, ma'am. Maggie pulled a biscuit from a tin she kept behind the counter and held it out to him. Made fresh this morning. Don't you tell me you're too proud to take it. Pride is a luxury, but a biscuit is a necessity. Joe took the biscuit from her. Thank you, ma'am. Polite, too. Got better manners than half the grown men in this town. She turned her attention back to Silas. What is it you need? Everything. Silas pulled the $4 from his coat pocket. This is all I've got. That'll buy you about a week's worth of supplies if we stretch it thin. I need it to last a month, and I need enough for 6 people. Maggie's eyebrows shot straight up. 6? Since when are there 6 of you? So Silas told her. Not the whole story, but enough of it. 5 children left behind in a wagon. A man by the name of Crane who dealt in children. A 4-year-old girl with a fever that had finally broken. Maggie listened to the whole thing without saying a word. When he was done, she came around the counter and started pulling things down from the shelves. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, a big slab of bacon, canned peaches, a bag of sugar, 2 blankets, and a bolt of cloth for making clothes. Maggie, that's a whole lot more than $4 worth. I know exactly what it's worth. I can't pay for all this. Did I ask you to? She just kept stacking items up on the counter. My husband and I, we never had any children. We always wanted them. I guess God had other plans. If there are 5 children who need feeding, then I'm going to feed them. You can pay me back when you're able. And if you can't, well, then it's a gift. And you will accept it, like a man who knows when it's time to say thank you. Silas opened his mouth, then he closed it again. Thank you, Maggie. That's better. Now, about this man Crane. Does Sheriff Cross know about him? I haven't spoken to Cross yet. Maggie's expression changed. Something careful started moving behind her eyes. You be cautious with Reuben Cross. He's not a bad man, but he ain't a brave one either. And men who aren't brave, they have a way of leaning toward whoever's paying the bills. You think he's been bought? I think he likes his comforts. And I think there are people in this territory who can afford to provide them. She finished stacking up all the supplies and looked him right in the eye. You're going to need more than $4 and a good heart to keep those children, Silas. You're going to need the law on your side. Or at least not standing against you. You know a lawyer? I know a reverend. Elijah Pope. He lost his arm at Shiloh, and he found God in the hospital tent right after. He's a hard man, and he's a fair man, and he don't scare easy. You go talk to him. I will. Silas loaded the supplies onto Buck's back while Joe stood watch. The boy hadn't relaxed one bit since they rode into town. His eyes followed every face, every movement, making a list of threats the same way his mother's people had been doing for generations. They were just crossing the street when a voice stopped them cold. Mallister? Silas turned around. Sheriff Reuben Cross was standing on the porch of his office. He was a big man with a belly that told you he lived an easy life and a badge that spoke of an authority he might not have rightfully earned. He was about 50, with a red face, and he was holding a cup of coffee like he'd been waiting for them. Sheriff? I heard you rode in with a boy. Cross looked over at Joe, then looked away, and then his eyes snapped right back. Indian half-breed, Joe said, before Silas could even get a word out. His chin was up, his hand was resting on his knife. I didn't ask you, boy. He's with me, Silas said plainly. I can see that. The question is why. And while we're on the subject of questions, I hear you picked up some strays during that storm. 5 children, no folks. Is that true? Word sure traveled fast in a small town. A lot faster than Silas was comfortable with. I found 5 kids in an abandoned wagon. I brought them to my place. That's a lot of mouths to feed for a man who can barely feed himself. That's my business. It becomes my business when children are involved. Territorial law says orphans go to authorized guardians or institutions, not to a single man living all alone on a failing ranch. Territorial law also says you can't sell children to mining operations. But I hear that happens plenty in this territory. Cross's face went from red to a pale white. He set his coffee cup down real careful. That's a hell of an accusation to be making. Well, it's a hell of a world. Cross stepped a little closer and lowered his voice. You listen to me, Mallister. I don't know what you think you know, but there are people in this territory with long arms and mighty short tempers. People who don't take too kindly to ranchers playing the hero. You'd be smart to hand those kids over to the proper authorities and get back to your cattle. And who are the proper authorities? You? Some judge I've never met? A fella named Victor Crane who writes children's names in a ledger right next to price tags? Cross flinched. It was a tiny thing, real fast, and he covered it up pretty well. But Silas saw it and Joe saw it, and they both filed that little piece of information away. I don't know any Victor Crane, Cross said. That's funny. Because Victor Crane seems to know exactly how things work around here. Cross's hand dropped down to his belt. Not to his gun, just to his belt. But the move said enough. This conversation is over. You keep those kids if you want, but when the paperwork finally catches up to you, don't you say I didn't warn you. Silas just tipped his hat. Appreciate the concern, Sheriff. He walked Buck on down the street with Joe right there beside him. The boy waited until they were clear out of town before he said a word. He's lying. I know. He knows Crane. When you said his name, the man's left eye twitched and he shifted his weight to his back foot. My mother taught me how to read people the same way I read the weather. What else did you read? He's scared. Not of you. He's scared of whoever Crane works for. Someone bigger. Someone who makes a small-town sheriff real nervous. A judge. Maybe. Or somebody with some real power. What is our plan? We are going home. We are going to make sure those children are fed, and then we will decide what to do next before they can make their own move. The journey back to the cabin took 2 hours. The sun was already beginning to dip below the mountains by the time the cabin finally appeared. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Buck seemed to sense they were home and quickened his pace. Hannah had the door open before Silas could even dismount. Her eyes quickly scanned the 2 riders, confirmed they were both unharmed, and a visible wave of relief washed over her. You made it back. I told you that I would. There are more supplies here than what we paid for. The woman who runs the store refused to take no for an answer. Hannah helped him unload the provisions while Clara darted around the cabin, looking at every single item as if it were Christmas Day. Peaches, Rosie, just look, canned peaches. She hugged the metal can to her chest. Can we please have some tonight? After we have dinner, Silas told her. Rosie says that after dinner is too far in the future. Rosie can be patient. Sam stood near the fire, just watching the supplies get stacked up. His jaw was tight, and a stutter was starting to form behind his teeth. That is a whole lot of food. It should last us for a little while. You did not take it, did you? No. People do not just give things to other people for free, not to people they do not know. Maggie Holloway does. Sam thought about this, filing this new piece of information away with all the other conflicting evidence he was gathering about a world that had always been cruel to him and now might just be trying to make amends for it. All right, he finally said. Just that one phrase. All right. It was a tiny beginning, a chance to think that maybe kindness didn't always have a catch. That evening, they had the best meal since they'd arrived. There was bacon and beans, cornbread, and even canned peaches for dessert. Clara savored her peaches, holding up each individual slice for Rosie the doll to see before she took a bite. Sam ate with a steady rhythm, just like he did everything else. Joe ate quickly and left his plate clean, making sure not a crumb was wasted. Hannah served herself last, only after checking that everyone else had eaten their fill. It was a mother's way of doing things. The one who eats last makes sure nobody goes hungry. Sit down and eat, Hannah, Silas told her. There is plenty for everyone. I am eating. No, you are managing things. That is different. Sit yourself down. Be a child for 5 minutes. Hannah stared at him as if he were speaking another language. Be a child. She likely could not remember what that felt like. She was 12 years old with the hands of a mother and the eyes of a soldier carrying a burden that would have crushed most grown-ups. She sat down. She ate. And for those 5 minutes, her defenses crumbled, and she was just a hungry girl enjoying peaches by the fire. After they finished eating, Silas told them about Sheriff Cross. He did not soften the news. These children had been told enough lies. They had earned the truth, no matter how harsh it was. The sheriff knows Crane, Silas explained, or he knows somebody who is connected to Crane. Whichever it is, he is not on our side. So what are we going to do? Hannah asked. Tomorrow I will ride back into town and speak with Reverend Pope at the church. I will see if he can help us get a legal claim. A legal claim to do what? To keep you. The little cabin fell silent. 5 pairs of young eyes were fixed on him. Sam opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again. Clara clutched Rosie even tighter. Joe's hand, which had been resting on his knife, went completely still. Nettie, who was now awake and sitting up against some pillows on the bed, just looked at Silas with those distant gray eyes. Hannah was the first to speak. Do you truly mean that? For real? I do not say things I do not mean. For how long? Silas looked directly at her. For as long as you all will have me. That sounds like forever. Maybe it is. You hardly know us. You. We could be a handful. Sam leaves his boots right where you can trip over them. Clara talks to her doll at 3 in the morning. Joe sleeps with a knife. And Nettie. Hannah glanced at her little sister. Nettie might not ever speak again. I leave my own boots where I can trip on them too. I have been talking to a horse for 6 years because I had no one else. And I have spent many nights with a gun on my lap. Silas looked over at Nettie. And if she never speaks again, that is all right. She does not need to talk, she just needs to be here. Nettie's hand began to move. It was a slow and purposeful gesture. She pointed right at Silas. Then she laid her hand flat on her own chest, right over her heart. Hannah gasped. She has not done that since Mama. That means... She paused, swallowing with difficulty. Mama would put her hand on her heart whenever she said, I love you. Nettie started doing it back to her. It was their special thing. Silas looked at the 4-year-old girl who would not say a word, but who had just communicated the most powerful thing anyone had said all evening. A lump formed in his throat, and his eyes began to sting. He pressed his own hand against his chest and kept it there. Nettie's expression did not shift, but her eyes did. A little something flickered in that empty gray gaze. It was small and stubborn and alive, like a single candle being lit in a room that had been dark for a very long time. Clara was the one who broke the silence. Rosie wants to know if this means we are a family now. Silas cleared his throat. What does Clara want to know? The same thing. It is always the same thing. Well then, you can tell Rosie we are working on it. Sam got to his feet, walked over to Silas, and just stood there for a second, his fists clenched by his sides, his entire body trembling with an emotion he could not force past the catch in his throat. Finally, he gave up on trying to speak and just wrapped his arms around Silas's waist and held on tight. Silas rested his hand on the boy's head. Sam's shoulders shook one time, then a second time, and then they were still. Oh, okay, Sam mumbled into Silas's shirt. Okay. Joe stayed right where he was by the door. He observed everything with those sharp, watchful eyes. When Silas glanced his way, Joe gave him the slightest of nods. It was not acceptance, not quite yet, but it was an acknowledgement that maybe this man was different. Maybe he was worth observing for a while longer, before making a final judgment. Outside, the night was clear and cold, filled with countless stars. Somewhere south, in the town of Elk Creek, Sheriff Reuben Cross was composing a letter to a man he pretended not to know. And even farther south, in a warm study with a black leather book lying open on a table, Victor Crane was drawing a line through 5 names and writing a single word next to them. Found. Reverend Elijah Pope had only one arm, a Bible that was soft from years of use, and eyes that seemed to look right through Silas, down to his very bones. 5 children, Pope said. 5 of them. And you intend to keep them? I do. You can hardly keep yourself, Mallister. I have seen you ride into town once a month, looking a little thinner each time. You drink more than you should, you talk less than you should. And now you want to raise 5 orphans in a cabin that looks like it is one bad winter away from falling to pieces. Silas just sat there in the church pew and listened. The Reverend was not wrong about any of it. The preacher stood at the altar, his empty left sleeve neatly pinned to his coat, his one good hand resting on the back of a chair. He had lost his arm at the Battle of Shiloh and had found something even stronger than bone to take its place. Conviction. I am not asking for your blessing, Silas said. I am asking for your help. Help with what, exactly? I need a legal claim. Papers that state those children are under my protection. Something that will stand up if a man named Victor Crane shows up to take them. The Reverend's expression shifted. It was a small change, but Silas saw it. Pope's jaw clenched and his hand pressed down hard on the chair. You said the name Crane. You know who he is. I know the name. Pope stepped down from the altar and sat in the pew directly across from Silas. His voice grew lower. Victor Crane has passed through this area 3 times in the last 2 years. Every time he does, children disappear. They are mostly from families on the wagon trails, poor families, desperate ones. He arrives with official-looking papers, making promises and using legal terms that sound legitimate, even when they are rotten to the core. Where do the children end up? I have been trying to figure that out. No one will talk. The families who sold their children are too full of shame. The ones who had their children taken from them are too afraid. And the law? Pope shook his head. The law in this territory answers to Judge Cornelius Stark. And Stark controls things just like a spider controls its web. You do not even see the strands until you are already tangled up in them. Judge Stark, the territorial judge, is based out of Casper, but his influence spreads much farther than that. Cross reports to him. Half the sheriffs in Wyoming report to him. And from what little I have managed to uncover, Crane reports to him as well. Silas leaned in closer. So, the man who is selling children is being protected by a judge. I cannot prove it. Not for sure. But I have sent 2 letters to the federal marshal's office in Denver. I have received no reply. Pope's gaze remained fixed on Silas. You need to understand what you're getting into. This is not just one wicked man with a ledger. This is an entire system. You have got papers, badges, and courtrooms all working together to make the theft of children appear completely legal. I understand. Do you really? Because if you choose to fight this, they will not only come for the children, they will come for you. They will call you a kidnapper, a squatter, an unfit protector. They will use every weapon they have, and they have quite a few. Let them come. Pope looked at him for a long, quiet moment. You were in the cavalry, were you not? For 12 years, I can tell. You have that look, the one men get when they have made up their minds to charge ahead, and nothing less than a bullet is going to make them stop. Pope reached into his coat and took out a folded piece of paper. I began drafting these about 6 months ago. They are guardianship papers. I wrote them up for a family in Sheridan whose children were being threatened, but the family left town before we had a chance to file them. He placed the document on the pew between them. The legal wording is solid. I had a lawyer in Denver look it over. If we write in your name and the children's names, and I sign it as a witness, it will give you temporary legal custody until a formal hearing can be held. Will it be enough to stand against Crane's papers? That all depends on the judge. If Stark is the one who hears the case, you will lose before you even get a chance to speak. But if we can bring the matter before a federal court, that is a whole different situation. How do we get it into a federal court? We need to find proof that Crane is moving children across territorial borders. That makes it a federal crime, and it takes it out of Judge Stark's control. What kind of proof? Personal accounts, records, any other families who are willing to speak up? Pope folded his hand in his lap. I have been fighting this battle quietly for 2 years, Silas. Writing letters, asking questions, and getting absolutely nowhere because I am just one man with one arm in a church full of folks who are too scared to take a stand. But you have something that I do not. What is that? 5 children who can testify to exactly what Victor Crane does. 5 witnesses who have names, faces, and a story that would make any federal judge sit up and take notice. Silas could hear Hannah's voice in his head, telling him about that black leather book, the numbers scribbled next to each name, and how Crane called her brothers and sisters damaged goods. Hannah was just 12. Sam had a stutter that tripped up his words. Nettie didn't say a word to anyone. Joe was half Cheyenne, and that meant half the folks in this territory wouldn't believe a thing he said. And little Clara was only 7. Did he really think anyone would pay them any mind? I reckon 5 children speaking up will be a lot harder to ignore than one preacher's letters. They've already seen too much trouble. They surely have. And they'll see a whole lot worse if Crane gets his hands on them. Pope's voice got a little softer. I am not asking them to be soldiers, Silas. I am just asking them to speak the truth. That is all it is. Silas took the guardianship papers and read them over not once, but twice. His hands felt steady as a rock, but deep inside, something was trembling. It was down in that place where all the old fears lived. The fear of coming up short, of not being good enough, of standing over fresh graves knowing he could have done things differently. Where do I put my name? Right on that line. And I will need the children's full names. Hannah Ruth Dawson, Samuel Dawson, Clara Mae Dawson, Annette Dawson, and Josiah Whitfield. Pope wrote down every name, slow and deliberate, with his steady hand, the pen gliding across the paper. When he was done, he signed his own name right below and pressed the church's seal into the hot wax at the bottom of the page. This paper makes you their guardian in the eyes of the Lord, and if we get lucky, in the eyes of the law. You guard it with your life. Silas carefully folded the document and tucked it inside his coat, close to his chest, right next to his heart. Thank you, Reverend. Do not thank me just yet. This is only the start of the battle. Silas was getting Buck ready outside the church when a hand grabbed hold of his arm. He whirled around, his own hand going straight for his Colt, but he found himself looking right into the eyes of old Tom Consincade. Take it easy, son. It is just me. Tom was 67 years old, with a face that looked like cracked leather and hands that could still gentle a wild horse, or break a man's jaw, whichever the day called for. He had been Silas's neighbor from the very beginning. He was the man who had dug the graves for Catherine and Lily. He was the man who came to check on Silas every couple of weeks, whether Silas wanted him to or not. Heard you took on some passengers, Tom said. Word gets around. Everything gets around in a small town. But gossip, well, gossip travels the fastest. Tom leaned up against the hitching post. 5 children, Silas. Are you certain about this? No. That is an honest answer. That is good. A man who is sure about something this big is either a liar or a fool. Tom crossed his arms over his chest. What do you need? I did not ask for any help. I did not wait for you to ask. What is it you need? Silas looked at this old man who had been more of a father to him than his own blood ever was. I need somebody to help me fix up the cabin. It is going to need another room, maybe even 2. You cannot keep 5 kids in a little place built for just one man. I can still swing a hammer. I need somebody to teach the boys how to work the cattle. I am going to be spread mighty thin. I can handle that too. And I need somebody who will stand right there with me if things get sideways with the law. Tom's eyes got hard. Not angry, just certain. Son, I stood my ground at Gettysburg when the whole Confederate army came roaring up that hill. I have stood in worse places than some courtroom in Wyoming. You just tell me when and where, and I will be there. You do not owe me a thing, Tom. This is not about owing anybody anything. This is about doing what is right. And the right thing is making sure 5 children do not get sold off to some mine operator just because a judge decided they were not fully human. Tom stood up straight. Now, you introduce me to these children before we lose the whole day. They rode back to the cabin together. Tom was on his old mare, Silas was on Buck, and Joe rode behind Silas just as quiet as he had been all morning. When they got to the cabin, Hannah had the door open before they even got off their horses. Her hand was resting on her knife. It seemed like it was always on her knife. Who is he? Hannah asked, jerking her chin toward Tom. Thomas Consincade, my neighbor. He is here to give us a hand. Tom swung down from his horse and walked toward the door. He stopped about 3 feet away and took off his hat. Miss Dawson. The name is Tom. I am old. I am loud. And I happen to make the best venison stew in the whole Wyoming territory. Your guardian here asked me to stop by, and I brought a whole haunch of deer that is just begging to be cooked. Hannah looked at the meat, then looked at Tom, and then she looked at Silas. You told him about us? He already knew. It is a small town. Does everybody know? Most likely. Hannah's face tightened up. That means Crane knows too. That is why Tom is here. Tom stepped right inside and got to work, just like he had lived there his entire life. He found the big cooking pot, started cutting up the venison, and had water on to boil before Hannah even had a chance to offer her help. Clara watched him from behind her little doll. Rosie wants to know if you are a grandfather. Tom looked down at the little girl. I am whatever you need me to be, little miss. Rosie needs a grandfather. Well then, Rosie has got one. A smile spread across Clara's face. It was the biggest one Silas had seen on her since the night she had first crawled up into his lap. She walked right over to Tom and held up her doll. "This is Rosie. She is shy." "Well, you can just tell Rosie that I am shy too. We can be shy with each other." "You do not look shy." "I am the best kind of shy, the kind you cannot even see." Clara let out a giggle. The sound echoed through the little cabin like it was stolen from a different world, a world where children were supposed to laugh instead of cry, where old men made jokes instead of digging graves, where a family could be built out of nothing more than stubbornness and need. Sam came in from the barn where he had been feeding Buck. He saw Tom and just froze. His jaw clamped shut. The stutter started to build up behind his teeth like water rising behind a dam. "Sam," Silas said, "this here is Tom Consincade. He is going to be helping out around here." Sam's eyes shot straight to Tom's hands, checking for a weapon, for a fist, for all the things a boy learns to check for when a strange man comes into his home. Are you a friend of Silas? I am the closest thing he has got to one, and you must be the young fellow who has been keeping his sisters safe." Sam stood up a little taller. That is my job. That is a hard job for a boy your age. I am not a boy. No, I can see that plain as day. You are a man who just happens to be 10. That is a different thing altogether, and it is rarer than you might think. Tom held out his hand. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Sam." Sam looked at the offered hand, then up at Tom's face. Then he reached out and shook it. His grip was strong. His eyes stayed dry. But you could see something in his shoulders relax just a little, like the weight he was carrying had shifted. It was not gone, but now it was shared. They ate venison stew that night, and it was the best meal that cabin had seen since the day Silas built it. Tom told stories about the old days, spinning yarns about chasing buffalo before the great herds vanished, about the war, and about forging a life in a country that didn't seem to want him. He talked the way old-timers do, slow and rambling, and the children listened close because his voice was like a warm blanket, and his tales felt real. Even Joe paid attention. He didn't join in or move from his post by the door, but his eyes tracked every word Tom spoke. And once, when Tom brought up trading with the Cheyenne, Joe's hand went to his mother's knife. Not to defend, but to remember. Tom saw it. He didn't make a fuss, he just steered his story toward the Cheyenne, talking about their skill on horseback, their bravery, and how they could read the land like it was an open book. "Best folks I ever dealt with," Tom said. "A Cheyenne's promise was worth its weight in gold, even more than gold. You can take a man's gold, but you can't steal his word." From the doorway, Joe's voice came, quiet but firm. "My mother used to say the same thing. Your mother was a wise woman. And I'd bet she was wise about a lot of things. She was." Tom held Joe's gaze for a long moment. Then he gave a single nod, the kind of look one man gives another, before turning back to his stew. After supper, Tom headed out, promising to come back in the morning with tools for the cabin edition. Silas walked with him out to his horse. "They're good children," Tom said as he swung into the saddle. "Every one of them. They've sure been through the ringer." "I can tell. That oldest girl especially. She's carrying a grown man's load on her little shoulders. You've got to find a way to let her set it down." "I'm working on it." "Well, work harder. Because if you don't, she's going to shatter, and it'll happen quietly like it does with strong folks. You won't even see it coming until it's all over." Tom rode away into the darkness. Silas stood there and listened until the sound of the horse's hooves disappeared. Then he went back inside. Hannah was at the basin washing plates. The other children were fast asleep, even Joe, who had finally given in to his weariness with his knife still in his hand. "He's a good man," Hannah said, not looking up from her work. "Tom, he's the real deal." "He is. What about the Reverend? Is he genuine too? As genuine as they come?" And the lady at the general store, Maggie, the real deal. Hannah placed the last plate on the drying rack and wiped her hands. She turned to look at Silas. In the flickering firelight, he could see the tiny fractures in her defenses getting wider. Not collapsing, just spreading like a dam holding back too much water. All my life, the decent people have been the ones to leave. The selfish ones are the ones who hang around until they get what they came for. I just don't know how to see the difference anymore. You are 12. You should not have to know the difference. But I have to, because I have 4 other people counting on me to see it right. Silas took a seat at the table. Hannah, you need to listen to me. You are not carrying 4 people anymore. You have 4 people and you have me. That is different. How is that different? Because I am the grown-up here. The worrying, the making plans, the lying awake at night trying to figure out the next move. That is my responsibility now, not yours. You cannot just say the words and make it so. No, I have to show you. And I plan to. But you are going to have to let me. Hannah just stared into the flames. Her jaw was tight. Her hands clenched the tabletop so hard her knuckles turned white. If I let my guard down, she whispered, and you let us fall, I will not be able to put the pieces back together this time. I hardly managed it the last time. I will not let you fall. Everybody lets us fall. I am not everybody. And I have official papers now that say those children are mine to look after, legal documents signed by a reverend and bearing a church seal. Nobody is taking them from me without one heck of a fight. Hannah looked straight at him. Show me. Silas took the guardianship paper from his coat pocket and gave it to her. Hannah read it with care, her lips silently forming the formal words. When her eyes reached the list of names, her fingers froze. You put all of us on here, all 5 of us. You even put down Joe. Joe is a part of this family. He is not our blood, neither am I. Blood is not what makes a family, Hannah. Making a choice does. Hannah carefully folded the document and returned it to him. When she raised her head, her eyes were shining. It was not from tears, but from something much stronger. If they show up to take us, she said, I am fighting too. Do not try to keep me safe from it. Do not lock me in the barn. It is my right to fight for my own family. I agree. And I am keeping the knife. I would not even think about taking it from you. Hannah nodded. Then she did something he had not seen her do since the evening he first found them. She sat down, not on the floor next to Nettie, and not at the table where she could keep an eye on the door. She sat in the chair closest to the fire, pulled her knees up to her chest, and rested her head on the back of it like a 12-year-old girl, like a child. I am so tired, Silas. I know you are. I have been tired since Mama passed away. I know that, too. Is it all right if I'm just tired for a little bit? Just for a little while? It is all right. I am on watch tonight. Hannah let her eyes close. Her breathing became even, and her hands relaxed. The knife was still tucked in her belt, but for the first time her fingers were not resting on its handle since they left Missouri. Silas settled into the spot by the door where Joe usually stood guard. He checked his Colt revolver. 6 rounds were loaded with 20 more in the box nearby. Tom would return in the morning. The Reverend had the legal papers filed away. Maggie was arranging for more supplies. It was not nearly enough. He knew that Crane was still out there. Stark was backing him. Cross had been compromised. The whole legal system in the territory could be turned on 1 man and 5 children with a simple signature from the right kind of judge. But Silas had an advantage they did not. He had good people ready to make a stand. A preacher who had lost an arm but found his backbone. A store owner who helped strangers just because it was the right thing to do. An old man who had stood up to the Confederate Army and was not about to be scared off by some judges. And he had 5 kids who had made it through a blizzard, a betrayal, and a sickness. And they were still here, still breathing, and still willing to fight. So let Crane come. Let him bring his law books and his documents and his paid-off sheriff and his crooked judge. Let him ride right up to this little cabin with all the power the law could give him. He would be met with a bolted door, a loaded gun, and a man who had nothing left in this world to lose except for the family he had just found. The fire died down to glowing embers. The children slept soundly. And outside, the snow began to fall once more, soft and quiet, blanketing the tracks and trails and hiding all the signs of who had been where and why. Some paths, once you take them, you can't just turn back. Some trails just have to be seen all the way to the end. And this particular trail, Silas knew in his gut, was heading straight for a showdown. Crane made his appearance on a Tuesday. Silas was out in the barn showing young Sam the right way to brush down a horse when Joe's frame filled the doorway. The boy didn't say a word. He just pointed to the south. Silas set the brush down and walked over to the barn's entrance. 3 riders were making their way up the trail. The man out front was wearing a black leather coat. "Sam, get in the house. Tell Hannah to bolt the door and keep everybody away from the windows. What is going on?" "Go on now." Sam took off running. Silas drew his Colt, checked the cylinder, and slid it back into its holster. 6 shots. He patted his coat, feeling the guardianship papers he kept in his chest pocket. Then he stepped out into the biting cold and waited. Victor Crane reined his horse to a halt about 20 feet from the cabin. He was the spitting image of what Hannah had described. Tall, well-dressed, with a neatly trimmed gray beard. He had a scar on his chin, looking like someone tried to slice that lying mouth of his clean off and just missed. A gold watch chain dangled from his vest. Trailing him were 2 men with rifles laid across their saddles and expressions that told you they were eager to use them. Crane smiled, the kind of grin that made your skin want to crawl right off your bones and go hide somewhere. "Mr. Mallister, I have been looking forward to this meeting. Can't say the feeling is mutual. That is understandable. I imagine you have been hearing tales about me from the children. Youngsters do have such active imaginations. Get off my land." Crane stayed put, his horse shuffling its feet in the snow, its breath puffing out in white clouds. "I am here on official business. I possess a court order, signed by Judge Cornelius Stark himself, which grants me legal guardianship over 5 minor children who are currently in your unlawful care." He produced a folded document from his coat and held it up. "Would you like me to read it?" "I can read just fine. And I've got some papers of my own." "Ah, yes, the good Reverend Pope's little piece of paper." Crane's smile grew wider. "I am afraid a guardianship from a church does not override an order from a territorial court. Mr. Mallister, the law on this matter is perfectly clear. The law is also pretty clear about the buying and selling of children." "I do not buy and sell children. I provide placement services for orphans who are in need. It is charity work, a difficult and thankless job, but somebody has to do it." "Well, somebody has got to put a bullet in you, too. The only real question is who gets the honor." Crane's smile faltered, just for a second. Then it returned, even wider than before. "Making threats will not help your situation. In fact, they will harm it quite a bit when I describe this little chat to Judge Stark." He reached inside his coat a second time and pulled out another document. "This is a warrant for your arrest. Kidnapping, harboring stolen property, and obstructing lawful custody. Those children are not property. The law says otherwise." "Then the law is wrong. The law is never wrong, Mr. Mallister. It is merely an inconvenience for people who fail to understand how it works." Crane tucked the documents back into his coat. "Now I am going to offer you one chance. Turn over the children without a fight, and I will ask Judge Stark to forget about the criminal charges. You can go back to your cattle, your whiskey, and your quiet little existence. No harm will come of it. And the children will be put in suitable facilities where they will be given food, a roof over their heads, and gainful employment." "Mines? You mean mines?" "I mean employment that is suited to their individual abilities. A 4-year-old girl who does not speak, what kind of employment is suited for her?" Crane's jaw clenched, the first sign of a crack in his polished surface. "That is not your concern. I am making it my concern." Behind Silas, he heard the cabin door creak open. His stomach sank. He had ordered Hannah to stay inside, to bar the door, and to keep everyone away from the windows. Hannah stepped out and came to stand right beside him. The handle of a knife stuck out from her belt. Her face was as pale as a ghost, but her eyes were blazing. Hannah, get back in the house. No, that is not a request, and I'm certainly not asking for your permission. Hannah stared right at Crane. Hello, Mr. Crane. Crane's whole expression changed. A hungry look flickered deep in his eyes. Hannah, you are looking well. Much better than the last time I saw you. The last time you saw me, you were leaving me and my family to freeze to death in the wilderness. That is not what took place. That is exactly what took place. You took our horses. You took all our food. You told my brother he was worth $20, and that my baby sister was worth $5. Then you rode off and left us all in the middle of a blizzard. You are confused, child. The trauma from your parents' passing has clouded your memory. My memory is perfect, and so is my brother's, and Joe's too. That makes 3 witnesses who remember every single word you said. Crane's smile vanished completely. He glanced at his 2 hired men, then his gaze snapped back to Hannah. This is precisely why children should not be allowed to make their own decisions. They simply do not have the ability to grasp complex matters. I understand more than enough. I understand that you buy kids from desperate families, and then you sell them to the mines. I understand you have a judge in your pocket and a sheriff on your payroll. And I understand that if you take us, we will just disappear, and nobody will ever ask a single question. Hannah. Silas's voice was low. That is enough. It is not nearly enough. Hannah took a step closer. You want to take me? All right. You come and take me yourself. Do not send your hired guns. Do not hide behind your official papers. You walk right up here and you put your hands on me, and let's just see what happens. Crane just stared at her. A 12-year-old girl, 90 pounds at most, standing in the snow holding a kitchen knife with all the fury of someone who had lost everything and was refusing to lose one thing more. You have made your point, Crane finally said. His voice was different now. All the charm had evaporated. What was left was cold and flat and ugly. I will return with the sheriff and a complete warrant. When I do, anyone who resists me will be arrested, and the children will be taken by force if need be. He yanked his horse's reins around. You have 24 hours, Mallister. I suggest you use them wisely. The 3 riders vanished down the trail. Silas kept watching until they were completely out of sight. Then he turned to Hannah. His hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from using every bit of his willpower not to shoot Crane in the back. I told you to stay inside, and I told you I fight for my family. That was not fighting. That was you painting a giant target on your own back. He already had a target on me. At least now he knows I will bite back. Silas opened his mouth to argue, but the cabin door swung open again. Sam was standing there, his face all tight, his hands clenched into little fists. I heard all of it. What are we going to do? We are not going to panic. I am not panicking. I am asking what we are going to do. Behind Sam, Clara's small face peeked out. She was clutching Rosie tightly to her chest. The bad man is coming back, is not he? Yes, Silas said, because telling a lie would be even worse than telling the truth, but he is not going to take you. How do you know that? Because I will not let him. But what if you cannot stop him? The question just hung there in the frigid air. Clara's gaze was steady, far too steady for a 7-year-old. She had been let down enough times in her short life to know that wanting to stop something and being able to stop it were 2 very different things. Silas knelt down in the snow to be at her eye level. You remember what your brother said about promises? That they are just words people say right before they leave you. Clara nodded. He is right. Words are cheap, so I am not going to make you a promise. I am going to give you a fact. And the fact is this: every single person in this cabin, plus Tom and Maggie and Reverend Pope, all of us are going to stand between you and that man. That is not a promise. That is just what is going to happen. Clara held Rosie up to her ear, listening for a moment. Then she looked back at Silas. Rosie says facts are better than promises. Rosie is the smartest person I know. Silas got to his feet and looked at the 4 young faces staring up at him. Hannah with her knife and her fire. Sam with his fists and his quiet anger. Clara with her doll and her heavy wisdom. And through the open door behind them, he saw Joe sitting by Nettie's bed, his hand resting on his mother's knife. "Ready. This is what is going to happen," Silas said. "Hannah, you ride over to Tom's ranch. Tell him Crane paid us a visit. Tell him we have got 24 hours. Sam, you ride down to Maggie's store. Tell her the same thing. Ask her if she can get a message to Reverend Pope. I cannot ride that far." "Well, Buck knows the trail. You just hang on and let him do the walking." "What about me?" Clara asked. "You have the most important job of all. You are going to stay here with Nettie and Joe. You keep your sister warm. You keep her safe. Can you handle that?" Clara nodded, her expression serious. "Rosie and me are good at keeping people safe. I know you are." Within the hour, Hannah and Sam were gone, riding off in opposite directions. Silas stood at the cabin door, watching them go. Two kids on horseback, carrying messages that could be the difference between a free life and a life in chains. It felt wrong to send them out there all by themselves. Every single thing about this felt wrong. Joe came and stood next to him. "You should have sent me. I need you right here." "Why?" "Because if something bad happens before they can get back, you are the best fighter in this whole cabin." Joe looked up at him. Something in the boy's expression changed. It was not exactly pride. It was recognition. It was the feeling that someone finally saw him for what he was, and saw value in it instead of something to fear. "My mother fought when she had to," Joe said quietly. "She never went looking for a fight, but she never ran from one either. We will not run either. If Crane comes back with armed men, men, you and I cannot defend this cabin, not with two little ones inside. Then we will not try to defend the cabin. We will relocate." "To where?" Silas had been mulling this over since Crane rode off. "There is an old mining camp about 5 miles to the northeast, been empty for 10 years. It has stone walls, a good defensive setup, and only one way to get in." "You have been to this place?" "I scouted it back in my cavalry days. It is solid. If we have to make a run for it, I can carry Nettie. You are only 9 years old. I carried my own mother's body for 2 miles after she died. I think I can carry a 4-year-old. Those words struck Silas like a kick from a horse. He looked at Joe, this young boy who had buried his own mother with his own 2 hands at 9 years old, who carried her knife and her wisdom and her sorrow with him every single day. And he finally understood something he should have realized much earlier. Joe was not a child trying to act tough. He was a warrior who just happened to be a boy. "If it comes down to that," Silas said, "we all go together. No one gets left behind. That is what my mother said when the soldiers came. No one gets left behind." Joe paused. She was the one who was left behind. "I am not your mother, and this situation is not that one. No, it is not." Joe turned around and walked back into the cabin without saying another word. The hours passed slowly. Silas checked his bullets, cleaned his revolver, and honed the edge of his knife. These were the things a man did when waiting was the only choice, and taking action was the only thing that could keep fear at bay. Clara sat beside Nettie, telling her stories using Rosie the doll's voice. She spun wonderful tales about a doll who lived in a magical cabin where no one ever felt cold or hungry or afraid. Nettie listened intently. She never spoke, but her eyes followed Clara's every move. And once, for just a fleeting moment, the corner of her mouth twitched upwards. It was not a smile, but the echo of one. It was a memory of what smiling used to feel like before the world had taught her that staying quiet was much safer. "Rosie is building a castle," Clara explained to Nettie. "It has a huge door that no bad people can ever get through. And on the inside, there is a fire that is always burning and food that never disappears, and a pa who never ever leaves." Joe observed them from his position near the door. His knife was in his hand. His gaze was stern. But when Clara mentioned the word pa, something in his face seemed to crack just for an instant. Then he looked away and went back to keeping watch on the trail. Hannah got back first, riding hard with Tom's horse galloping right behind her carrying the old man. Tom slid off his horse, holding his rifle and a bag full of ammunition. Crane has allies in town, Tom said, trying to catch his breath. 3 more men rode in this morning, hired guns. They were asking around about Mallister's property. How many does that make? Crane plus 5, maybe 6 men. They are armed and they look mean, Sheriff. Cross is officially keeping his distance, but he is not going to do anything to get in their way either. Sam showed up 20 minutes later. His buckskin was covered in sweat and breathing hard. The boy jumped off the horse and hurried over to Silas. Maggie is getting a message to the Reverend. She also said something else. Sam paused to catch his breath. She said there is a new man in town. He arrived this morning on the stagecoach that came from Denver. A federal lawman. And he's wearing a star. Silas and Tom looked at each other. A federal marshal. That is what Maggie called him. She said the Reverend is speaking with him at this very moment. Did she mention why he is here? She said the Reverend's letters finally got to someone important. A small feeling that might have been hope started to grow in Silas's chest. He had learned a very long time ago not to rely on hope. Hope was always the first thing to disappear when the shooting began. But this was something. We cannot depend on that, Tom said. If this marshal is legitimate, he could be a big help. But if he is not, or if Stark has already gotten to him, then we are in a worse position than we were before. I agree. We will prepare for the worst. They used the rest of the afternoon to get ready. Tom helped Silas transport the most critical supplies over to the old mining camp, making 3 separate trips with pack horses. Joe scouted the path to the camp and found 2 spots where a rifleman could cover the entrance. Hannah took inventory of their food and ammunition with the skill of a seasoned quartermaster. Sam told Silas he wanted to learn how to shoot a gun. You are 10 years old. I know how old I am. I want you to teach me. Silas just looked at the boy, taking in those fiery eyes, those steady hands, and that little jaw set so hard it wouldn't let a lick of fear show through. Have you ever shot a firearm before? No. Well, it is loud. It has a kick like a mule, and it changes you. Once you go and pull that trigger, there is no unpulling it. I know that. Do you really? Because this is not some kind of game, Sam. If things go south tomorrow, people could get hurt. They could end up dead. Folks are already dead. My daddy died. My mama died. And I could not do a blessed thing about it because I was too little and too young and just too dang useless. The boy's stutter completely disappeared on that curse word, as if the feeling just burned it right out of him. I am not useless anymore. Teach me. So, Silas taught him. Not everything, mind you, just the fundamentals. How to hold the rifle still and true, how to take a breath, how to look down the barrel and squeeze, not yank the trigger. Sam hung on every last word, soaking up every little detail. When he fired that first round, the recoil sent him stumbling back a step, but the boy did not fall. He planted his feet firm, set that jaw, and brought the rifle right back up. Good, good, do it again. Sam fired 3 more times. Each shot was steadier than the one before it. The boy was a natural, plain and simple, making up for what his mouth could not say. Whatever the boy's stutter took from his words, his hands gave back with steady purpose. Silas spoke. That will do for today. Sam replied, Just one more. Silas shook his head. We are done. The boy lowered the rifle, his eyes shining and his head held high. Thank you. Silas thought to himself, Don't you thank me. I just armed a 10-year-old boy. A man ought not to feel right about something like that. But that is what a father would do. The thought stopped Silas in his tracks. Sam just stood there, holding that rifle, looking right up at him. The boy's gaze had no stutter, no doubt, and not a bit of fear. It was just a boy looking at a man, seeing something he desperately needed. Yeah, Silas said, his voice low. I reckon it is. Darkness fell. They all gathered inside the cabin for what could be their final quiet evening together. Tom was cooking up some deer meat. Maggie showed up around sundown, bringing more supplies and some news. Pope is meeting with the federal man as we speak. His name is Marshal James Whitcomb. He has been looking into Stark for 6 months. The letters Pope sent finally landed on the right man's desk. Silas asked, "Is he heading this way?" Maggie nodded. Pope said to give him till sunup. If this Whitcomb fellow is the real deal, he will show up with the power to put a stop to Crane. If he is not, we will know it by morning. Hannah said, "That is a whole lot of maybes." Maggie corrected her gently. "It is a whole lot of hope. And sometimes hope is all you have." Hannah's voice was sharp. "Hope did not save my folks." Maggie replied, "No, but it kept you going long enough to run into someone who would." Hannah looked over at Maggie, this woman who would give the shirt off her back to a stranger and who spoke the hard truth with a soft touch. Then her eyes moved to Tom, sitting by the fire, making his knife sharper. She saw Silas loading his Colt pistol, and Pope's guardianship papers tacked up on the wall for all to see. "Why are all of you doing this?" Hannah finally asked. "A week ago, you did not even know our names. We are just nobody, 5 children from a wagon that did not make it. Why do y'all even care?" Maggie knelt to look Hannah square in the eye. "Because for 30 years I have lived in this town and watched decent folks look the other way while terrible things happened. Because my husband, on his deathbed, asked me to be more courageous than he ever was. And because when I see you, I see the daughter I was never blessed with. And I will be damned to hell before I let a man like Crane put his hands on her." The wall Hannah had built around herself did not break this time. It did not have to. That wall was still standing, tall and strong, keeping her safe. But she opened a little door in it, just big enough for Maggie to come inside. She leaned in and buried her face in Maggie's shoulder. It was only for a second, just long enough to feel what it was like to be held by a woman who smelled of baking flour and clean soap and simple kindness. Then she pulled away, stood up straight, and put her hand on the knife at her belt. "What time does Crane get here?" "At dawn," Tom said without looking up. "Men like him prefer the dawn. It makes them feel like they have all the power. Then we will be ready for him at dawn." They all settled down for the night. Tom volunteered for the first watch. Silas said he would take the second. Joe spoke up and insisted on the third. Nobody argued with him. That boy had earned his place to stand guard right alongside the men. Around midnight, Silas went to check on every child. Sam was fast asleep with a rifle right beside him, close enough to grab. Clara was sleeping next to Rosie, muttering in her dreams about big castles with giant doors. Joe sat propped against a wall, his eyes wide open, a knife resting on his legs as he watched. Hannah was lying next to Nettie, with one arm protectively over her little sister, her other hand still resting on her knife, even in her sleep. And then there was Nettie. Silas knelt down by her bed to look at the littlest one. The child's eyes were open. She was just staring at him in the dim light. Those gray eyes of hers held a stillness like a stone at the bottom of a creek. Then she did something she had not done since the very first night. She reached her little hand out and laid it flat on his chest, right over his heart. Silas put his hand on top of hers, holding it there, feeling the tiny, warm weight of a child's hand against his own heartbeat. "I got you," he whispered so low only she could hear. "All of you. And nobody is taking you anywhere." Nettie's hand fell away, her eyes drifted shut, and she finally slept. Silas stood up and walked over to the window. The snow had stopped falling outside. The sky had cleared, and the stars were like sharp, bright diamonds. The moon cast a silver glow across the white landscape. Out there somewhere, Crane was getting his men together. Stark was signing his papers. The whole crooked machine of the law was grinding and turning. And somewhere on the road between here and Elk Creek, a federal marshal was making up his mind about whether 5 children would live free or just vanish into the darkness. The morning would tell the tale. The morning would bring men with guns and badges and documents, men who figured power was about owning other people's lives. But the morning would also bring Silas Mallister and Tom Consincade and Maggie Holloway and a one-armed preacher who might have lost a limb but had not lost his will to fight. And it would bring 5 children who had faced everything this world could throw at them, and were somehow still on their feet. The fire in the hearth was burning low. Silas loaded his Colt pistol one last time. He had 6 bullets in the cylinder, 20 more in the box, and behind him, he could hear them breathing in the dark. 5 good reasons to make every single one of those bullets count. The dawn broke red. A crimson light washed over the snow like a final warning. Silas was already at the door, his Colt loaded and his jaw tight, when he heard the first sound of hoofbeats. Tom heard them too. The old man got up from his chair with his rifle ready and moved to the window. 6 riders coming in fast, he said. Crane is out front in that black coat of his. 2 men on either side of him. 3 more coming up behind. Tom narrowed his eyes. And they have a wagon with them. Bringing a wagon means they aim to take the children off today. Silas glanced back inside the cabin. Hannah was up with a knife tucked in her belt, standing guard over Ned's bed like a stone statue. Sam was right there beside her, gripping the rifle Silas had showed him how to use with both hands. Joe was posted at the back window, holding his mother's knife, his eyes sweeping the tree line for anyone trying to sneak around behind them. Clara sat on the floor, holding Nettie in her lap. Rosie was squeezed in between them, whispering something to her doll that was too quiet for anyone to hear. "Hannah," Silas said, "you take the children into the back room and bar the door. No, this is not up for discussion. You are right. It is not. I am staying. You are 12 years old, and I have buried both my parents, survived a blizzard, and kept 4 other people alive when it felt like the whole world was trying to wipe us out. I am staying right here." Silas did not have the time to argue about it. The riders were getting close enough to make out Crane's voice yelling out to them. "Mallister, your 24 hours are over. I have brought the sheriff, a deputy, and the legal authority to remove those children. You open this door or we will open it for you." Silas stepped out onto the porch. Tom was right behind him, rifle held at his side. The cold bit into both of them, sharp and clean. It was the kind of cold that made everything feel more real, like it was all coming to a head. Crane sat high on his horse out front. Behind him, Sheriff Reuben Cross sat on his own horse, looking like a man who would rather be anywhere else on God's green earth. The badge pinned to his chest glinted in the red light of dawn. 4 hired guns flanked them, all holding rifles, their faces like blank slates. "Morning, Crane," Silas said. "Looks like you brought the whole dang parade with you." "I brought the law, Mr. Mallister, something you seem dead set on ignoring." Crane waved a piece of paper in the air. "This is a court order, signed by Judge Cornelius Stark. Custody of 5 minor children is transferred to me, and it is effective right now. Sheriff Cross is here to see that it is enforced." Silas turned his gaze on Cross. "Are you really going to do this, Sheriff? Take 5 children and just hand them over to a man who sells kids to the mines?" Cross's jaw went tight. His eyes flickered away. He would not meet Silas's stare. "I am enforcing a court order. That is my job. Your job is to protect people, and that includes children. The law says those children belong with their legal guardian, and that is Mr. Crane. That law was bought and paid for, and you know it as well as I do." A dark red flush crept up the sheriff's neck. His horse shifted under him, picking up on all the tension. "I do not want any trouble, Mallister. Just hand them over and nobody has to get hurt." "Nobody is sending anybody anywhere." Crane's patience finally snapped. "That is enough. Sheriff, do your job." Cross swung down from his horse, real slow. He put his hand on his pistol, but he did not pull it. He started walking toward the cabin like a man walking to his own funeral. The hired guns behind him fanned out, covering all the angles. Tom brought his rifle up. "That is far enough, Reuben." Cross stopped dead. "Tom, do not do this. Do not make me. I have a legal order. You have got a piece of paper with a crook's name on it. That is not the same thing. Well, in the eyes of the law, it is. Then I reckon the law needs a new pair of glasses." The standoff held, tight as a fiddle string. Silas counted his own heartbeats. 6 armed men against 2. The numbers had not changed since yesterday. They were still bad. Then they all heard it. More hoofbeats coming fast from the south. A lot of them. Every head turned. 2 riders were barreling up the trail at a dead run. The first was Reverend Elijah Pope, his one good arm wrestling the reins, his coat flapping out behind him. The man riding with him was someone Silas had never laid eyes on. He was tall and lean, wearing a long gray coat and a silver star on his chest that was twice as big as the one Sheriff Cross wore. A federal star. Pope pulled his horse to a skidding stop, kicking up snow. "Silas, do not shoot anybody just yet." "Was not planning on it," Silas called back. "Yet." The federal man swung down from his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had stepped into worse messes than this and walked out just fine. He looked about 50, maybe older, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite, and eyes that sized up Crane like a hawk, spots a field mouse. "Who in the hell are you?" Crane demanded. "United States Marshal James Whitcomb. And you must be Victor Crane." Whitcomb pulled a folded document from inside his coat. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. The charges include child trafficking across territorial lines, conspiracy to commit forced labor, fraud, and the corruption of territorial officials." All the color just fell right out of Crane's face. "That is ridiculous. I have legal papers. Your papers were issued by Judge Cornelius Stark, who was arrested in Casper 2 hours ago on 17 counts of corruption, bribery, and conspiracy." Whitcomb's voice rang out across the clearing like a church bell. "Every order Judge Stark signed in the last 3 years is now under federal review. Every custody transfer, every guardianship, every last paper he ever put his name to is not worth the ink it is written in." Cross took a step back, his face turning a pasty gray. "I did not know. I swear to you I did not know about Stark." "You did not want to know, Sheriff. There is a big difference." Whitcomb turned to him. "You are not under arrest. Not right now, anyway. But you are relieved of your duty until this investigation is over. Hand over your badge." The sheriff's hand was shaking as he unpinned the star from his chest. He held it out without saying a word. Whitcomb took it and slipped it in his pocket like it was nothing. Because to him it was nothing. A badge does not mean a thing without an honorable man behind it. Crane's hired men were already backing their horses away. They had not signed up for a showdown with a federal marshal. One after another, they lowered their rifles. "Crane," Whitcomb said, "you can come with me peacefully, or you can choose to resist. I would much prefer peacefully, but I am prepared for either way." Crane's hand twitched toward his coat. Silas saw it. He knew that motion, and he had his Colt drawn and aimed before another soul could even blink. "Do not," Silas said, his voice low and steady. Crane's hand froze. He looked at Silas, and for the first time, that smooth, slick mask of his finally cracked clean off. There was no smile, no charm, none of his oily lies, just a man who had built a life on the misery of others and had finally come to the end of his road. "Those children are worthless," Crane spat. "A stuttering boy, a girl who cannot speak, a half-breed. You are throwing your life away for a bunch of damaged goods." Silas started walking forward, slow and deliberate, each step leaving a deep boot print in the snow. He stopped 2 feet from Crane's horse and looked straight up at the man. "You say that one more time. They are damaged." Silas grabbed the front of Crane's coat and yanked him clean out of the saddle. The man landed hard in the snow. The wind knocked right out of him. Silas stood over him, his Colt pointed at the man's chest. "Those children are worth more than every dollar you have ever touched, more than every name in your dirty little book, more than your fancy papers, your crooked judges, and this whole rotten world you built." Silas's voice was steady as a rock. His hand did not tremble one bit. "They are mine. And if you ever so much as breathe in their direction again, court order or not, badge or not, I will put you in the ground. That is not a threat. That is the only promise I have ever made that I am actually looking forward to keeping." Whitcomb stepped forward. "That is enough, Mallister. I will handle it from here." Silas held Crane's gaze for one more long second. Then he holstered his pistol and stepped back. Whitcomb's men, 2 deputies who had ridden in quietly behind the marshal, hauled Crane to his feet and slapped him in irons. The hired guns gave up their weapons without a fuss. Cross just stood off to the side without his badge, staring at the dirt. "Marshal Whitcomb," Pope said, "there is a mining operation about 20 miles east of here. They have children there in forced labor. I am aware of it. I have got men riding there as we speak. By noon today, every single child in that mine will be free." "How many?" Silas asked. "From what we have gathered, there is somewhere between 15 and 20 of them. Some as young as 6. Silas squeezed his eyes shut. 15 to 20 children down in the dark, working until their bodies gave out. And Crane had wanted to add 5 more to their number. "What about the families?" Pope asked, "the ones who sold their children? We are tracking them down. Most of them were tricked or forced into it. They will get a chance to get their kids back." Whitcomb looked over at Silas. "Which brings us to your particular situation. 5 children, no blood relation, and a guardianship paper from a church that might not mean a thing to a federal judge." Silas's hand instinctively went to his coat, to the papers tucked against his chest. "Those children are staying right here with me. That is not a decision you get to make all by yourself. Federal law is going to require a formal custody hearing. Then give me a hearing. I plan to, but I need to ask you something first." Whitcomb stepped a little closer and lowered his voice. "Those kids, do they actually want to stay with you? Not because they're scared, and not because they feel like they have no other choice. Because they choose to. Ask them yourself." Whitcomb looked toward the cabin. The door was now open. Hannah was standing in the doorway. Behind her, 4 little faces were peeking out. Whitcomb walked toward them, and Silas watched as the big man crouched down and spoke to each child, his voice much gentler than his hard granite face would suggest. He talked to Clara first. "What is your name, sweetheart?" "Clara May Dawson, and this is Rosie." "Hello, Rosie." "Clara, do you know why I am here? You are here to help us." "That is right." "Can you tell me, do you want to stay here with Mr. Mallister?" Clara looked at Whitcomb like he had just asked the silliest question in the whole world. "We do not call him Mr. Mallister. He is—" "Pa." Whitcomb's eyebrows shot up. He turned to Sam. "What about you?" Sam's jaw was tight. The stutter tried to come back, but he wrestled it down. "Silas taught me to shoot. He taught me how to brush down a horse. He taught me that being afraid does not mean you are weak." He took a deep breath. "He is the first man who ever looked my way and did not just see a broken boy. Do you want to stay?" "I want to stay." Whitcomb then moved to Joe. The boy stood a little apart, same as always, with his knife on his belt and his back straight. "Josiah Whitfield. Folks call me Joe." "Joe, you are not related to the Dawson children by blood, are you?" "No." "And you are not related to Mr. Mallister?" "No." "So why are you here?" Joe was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was so clear it cut through the cold morning air like his mother's knife through thick leather. "Because my mother was Cheyenne, and the Cheyenne do not measure family by blood. They measure family by who is standing with you when the big storm rolls in. Silas stood with us, all of us. When he had every reason in the world to just ride on by, he stopped. When he had every reason to give us up, he fought for us. My mother, she would have said that makes him kin." Joe touched the bone handle of his knife, "and my mother was never wrong about a thing in her life." Whitcomb just stared at the boy. Then he gave a slow nod. Slowly, and then turned to the bed where Nettie was lying. Hannah was sitting right beside her sister, with her hand resting on Nettie's shoulder. "This is Nettie," Hannah said. "She does not talk. She has not said a word since our mother passed away." Whitcomb crouched down next to the bed. "Hello, Nettie." Nettie just looked at him. She had these gray eyes, so still and so deep. She did not move a muscle, did not even blink. The whole cabin seemed to be holding its breath. And then Nettie slowly raised her hand. She pointed right at Silas, who was standing there in the doorway. And then she pressed her palm flat against her own chest, right over her heart. Whitcomb looked over at Silas. What does that mean? It means I love you, Hannah whispered. That is what our mama taught her. It is the only way she knows how to talk. Whittem stood up. He rubbed his face with both of his hands. And just for a second, the federal marshal looked like a man who was fighting hard to keep himself together. He cleared his throat. And what about you, Miss Dawson? Hannah? Hannah got to her feet. She seemed taller than Whittem expected. Or maybe she just carried herself in a way that made her seem tall. She looked that marshal right in the eye, with a gaze that had been old back in Missouri, and was only now starting to remember what it felt like to be young. A week ago, all I had was a knife and 4 people to protect, and there was not a single soul in this world I could trust. Now I have still got a knife, I have still got 4 people to protect, and I have a man who took a bullet for me before I even had to ask him to. She stopped talking. Whittem walked back over to Silas. He took a paper out of his coat and a pen from his vest. I am going to recommend full legal custody to the federal court. My report is going to include statements from all 5 of the children, testimony from Reverend Pope, Margaret Holloway, and Thomas Consincade, and all the evidence of Victor Crane's criminal operation. Considering everything, I expect the judge will approve it all within 30 days. 30 days. The paperwork always takes time, but until then, those children are staying right here with you, under federal protective custody, with me as the officer authorizing it. Whittem signed the paper and handed it to Silas. Congratulations, Mr. Mallister. You are a father. Silas took the paper. His hand was shaking. He folded it up with care and placed it against his chest right beside the guardianship document from Pope. 2 pieces of paper, 2 promises written down in ink instead of just spoken into the air. Tom clapped him hard on the shoulder. Well, son, you went and did it. I have not done anything yet. I still have a cabin that is too small. I have got $4 that is already good as spent, and I have 5 children who need more than I even know how to give. That is what neighbors are for, Tom said with a big grin. And that smile took 10 years right off his face. Besides, I have been meaning to tell you. Mary Elizabeth, my late wife, she left a trust down at the bank in Casper. It is not a whole lot, but it is enough. She always figured it was for kids. We just never had any of our own. I reckon she'd agree these 5 are more than qualified. Tom, I just can't take your money. That is not my money. It belongs to Mary. It was her final wish. Are you really going to stand there and argue with a woman who has passed on? I would not dare. About an hour later, Maggie showed up with a wagon just loaded down with provisions, more food, clothes in all sorts of sizes, and bolts of fabric for curtains and blankets. She even brought a rocking chair. Every home has got to have a rocking chair, she announced, for reading stories to the children. Nobody around here reads stories. Silas looked at her and said, Well, they do now. Maggie then reached under the wagon seat and pulled out a whole stack of books. Rebecca Thorne over at the schoolhouse is getting the children's class started up next month, and I went ahead and signed up all 5 of them. You put my children in school? Somebody had to do it. To do. Maggie planted her hands right on her hips. Silas Mallister, you are a good and brave man, but you cannot raise 5 little ones on nothing but deer meat and lessons on how to handle a firearm. They need their books. They need to learn their numbers. They need to learn about more than just surviving. They have to learn how to live, a voice said from the doorway. It was Hannah. And she was smiling, just a little hesitant smile, the kind that was ready to vanish if anything went wrong. But it was there, a true smile on a face that had long forgotten how to form one. They passed the next few weeks rebuilding. Tom and Silas worked together to add 2 new rooms to the cabin. Young Sam hauled lumber and hammered nails, and his hands were as steady as a rock, even when his voice trembled. Joe went out and marked the property lines, then built a strong fence for the cattle with the quiet skill of a man who knew that good land meant a safe life. Hannah took charge of everything from planning meals to organizing supplies and making schedules, because 12 years of being a mother had taught her things most grown folks never learn. Clara was the one who made the place feel like a home. She put dried flowers in all the windows and set Rosie the doll on a shelf where she could look out over the whole cabin. Rosie is our guardian, Clara explained to everyone. "She keeps watch when the rest of us are asleep." "What does Rosie see?" Silas asked her. "She sees a family. And Nettie." Nettie was healing, but it was slow, the way a truly deep wound does. She did not say a word, but she found her own ways to communicate. She would press her hand over her heart when Silas came to say good night. She would press it there again when Hannah braided her hair. She pressed it tight against her chest when Sam made her laugh by making funny faces. And she did laugh. It was a silent kind of laughter that shook her whole little body, and it changed her face completely. Doc Harlan made the trip out from Elk Creek to check on her. He said, "Physically, she is doing just fine. She is a strong girl. That silence is just grief. It will break when she is good and ready. Might be months, might be years. You cannot rush it." Silas did not rush it. He just made sure that every single night when he went to check on each of the children, he would stop by Nettie's bed and press his own hand to his chest. And without fail, every night, she would press her little hand to hers in return. Their conversations needed no words to be complete. Springtime arrived in Wyoming the way it always did, all at once and with a powerful rush. The snow disappeared and the creek started to run high. The whole valley turned a shade of green so bright it nearly hurt to look at. Silas stood out on the porch of his newly expanded cabin and just watched his children, his own children, as they spread out across the land like seeds that were finally taking root. Sam was down in the corral working with a new colt that Tom had brought for him. The boy's stutter had begun to ease up. It was not gone, but it was quieter. He still had to fight for his words now and then, but he had figured out that his hands could speak what his mouth could not, and the horses seemed to understand him just fine. Joe was up on the ridge overlooking the cabin, sitting with his legs crossed in the new grass, watching over the valley just like his mother's people had watched over this land for 1,000 years. He had even started to teach Clara a few words in Cheyenne, and Clara, in turn, had started teaching Rosie. So now it seemed the doll was bilingual. Hannah was sitting inside at the kitchen table, reading one of the books Maggie had brought. She still had that knife with her, and she probably always would. But her shoulders were not so tense anymore. The tightness around her jaw had finally let go. And just yesterday, Silas had heard her laughing at something Sam had said. It was a real laugh, open and free, and the sound of it was so pure it nearly took his breath away. Clara was sitting on the porch steps with Nettie, carefully brushing the little girl's hair while Rosie watched over them from her lap. 100 strokes, Clara said softly. Mama always told me 100 strokes is what makes it shine. Nettie sat perfectly still, letting her sister take care of her. Her eyes were shut and her face looked so peaceful. And then, in a voice so quiet that Silas thought he might have imagined it, she spoke a single word. Mama. It was just one word, barely more than a breath, but Clara heard it and she froze solid. Hannah heard it through the open window and suddenly appeared in the doorway. Sam stopped what he was doing in the corral and looked up. Joe stood up on the ridge. Every one of them stopped moving. It felt like the entire world just held its breath for a little 4-year-old girl who had been lost in silence for months and had just remembered how to speak again. "Nettie!" Clara's voice was shaking. "Did you just—" Nettie opened her eyes. She looked from Clara to Hannah, and then her eyes found Silas. Her little hand rose and pressed flat against her own chest. Then she pointed at all of them. Each and every one. Her small finger made a slow circle that took in the cabin, the porch, the corral, the ridge, and the whole valley. Everything. "Family," Nettie said, clear as a bell. Hannah fell to her knees and gathered her little sister into her arms. And the sound that came from her was not quite crying and not quite laughing, but something else entirely, a sound that held all the heartache and all the hope they had carried. Broken pieces of the last year, and set them down for good, easy-like on the ground. Sam hopped right over the corral fence and ran. Joe came tearing down from the ridge at a pace that just didn't seem natural. Clara threw her arms around both her sisters, with Rosie getting squeezed somewhere in the middle. Silas just stood there on the porch watching his children hold on to one another. And a part of him that had been shattered for 6 long years, a part he figured was dead and buried right next to Catherine and Lily. a feeling he had given up all hope of ever knowing again. It rose up in his chest like cool water from a deep well, filling up every last empty corner of him. He didn't join their hug. Not just yet. He just stood there and let it be. Let himself feel all of it. The full, heavy weight of love and sorrow and thankfulness and fear and joy all churned together into something that had no name because no one word was big enough to hold it. Then Clara's voice piped up from that pile of kids. "Pa, get down here. I'm fine right where I am. Rosie says to get down here." Well, you can't argue with Rosie. He knelt, and 10 arms pulled him right in. Hannah's and Sam's and Clara's and Joe's and little Nettie's, small and certain, wrapping tight around his neck and holding on with the kind of strength a child has when she's found her voice and ain't about to let go of the folks who helped her find it. "Family," Nettie said one more time, testing the sound of the word, tasting it, making sure it was real. "That's right," Silas said. "Family." That evening he took a walk to the 2 graves behind the cabin. The wooden crosses were worn by the weather, the wood gone soft. He hadn't come out here in months, just hadn't been able to face it. But tonight, with the setting sun painting the mountains gold and the sound of his children's voices drifting from the cabin, he stood in front of Catherine and Lily, and he spoke. "I found 'em," he said. "Or maybe they found me. I ain't quite sure which it was. 5 of them, all broken in their own ways. All of 'em stronger than they'll ever know." He took a breath. "I was broken, too. You knew it. You always knew that about me, Catherine. Even before you passed, you knew I was going to break." The wind rustled through the tall grass. Inside the cabin, he heard Clara laugh. And then Sam's voice followed, steadier these days. "That stutter was just a little catch now, not a brick wall. But I'm putting myself back together, not by myself. Never by myself. They helped me, every last one of them, to..." Silas laid a hand on the cross with Catherine's name carved in it. "I'll never stop loving you, either of you. But I've got more room now, room I never knew I had. Room for 5 more. His voice got thick. "I sure hope that's all right." The wind kicked up a bit. For just a second, it felt like a hand resting on his shoulder, light and warm and then gone before he could be sure it was ever there. "Thank you," Silas whispered, "for teaching me how to love. I'm gonna need it." He turned and walked back to the cabin. The door was open and the firelight spilled out into the twilight. Inside, Tom was in the middle of one of his buffalo hunting stories. Maggie was giving Hannah a hand with supper. Sam was showing Joe a card trick he'd picked up from a book. Clara was brushing Rosie's hair, explaining to Nettie that the doll needed exactly 50 strokes, not 100, on account of doll hair being different than people hair. Nettie listened close, and when Clara was done, Nettie pointed to the doll and said, quiet and clear, "Pretty. She is pretty, ain't she?" Clara just beamed. "Pretty," Nettie said again. And then looking right at Clara with those gray eyes that had been so empty for so long and were now filling up with everything that silence had kept locked away, she added, "Sister." Well, Clara just busted into tears and hugged Nettie so fierce the doll tumbled to the floor. Sam picked it right up and handed it back. "Be careful. Rosie's fragile." "Rosie's tough," Clara said through her sobs. "Rosie's the toughest one of all of us. After Hannah." "After Hannah." Silas eased himself down into the rocking chair. Maggie had brought his chair in. He was in his own cabin with his children all around him and his friends beside him, and the fire burning bright, and the night settling in all soft and cold and still outside. He'd started this winter with $12, 1 horse, and 2 graves. He'd ended up with 5 children, a whole community, a reason to get up in the morning, and something he thought was lost for good. It wasn't happiness. That word was too plain and simple. What he'd gained was the knowing that broken things could be mended, that empty places could be filled, that a man who'd lost everything could find it all again, not by searching for it, but by just standing still when a horse wouldn't budge on a snowy trail. 5 children, 3 girls, and 2 boys, every one of them carrying scars that might never fade completely. Every one of 'em braver than any soldier Silas had ever ridden beside. Every one of 'em was living proof that family ain't built from your blood or the law or some piece of paper, but from the simple, stubborn, and downright terrifying choice to love someone and never let them go. Clara looked up from her spot on the floor. Pa? Yeah, Rosie wants to ask you something. What does Rosie want to know? She wants to know if this is forever. Silas looked over at Hannah sharpen her knife by the fire, at Sam practicing his card trick with hands that didn't shake no more, at Joe carving a little horse from a block of wood with his mother's knife, at Nettie, leaning up against Clara, her lips moving without a sound around new words she was learning to say again, at Tom and Maggie, laughing about something in the kitchen, filling that cabin with the sound of people who chose to be there. You tell Rosie it's forever. Clara smiled real big. Rosie already knew. She just wanted to hear you say it. Outside, the last bit of light slipped away from the mountains. The stars popped out cold and bright. The same stars that had looked down on this valley for 10,000 years. The same stars that had watched a man find 5 lost children in a blizzard and make the only choice that ever really mattered. The choice to stop, the choice to stay, the choice to build a family out of nothing but grit and love, and the solid rock belief that every single child, no matter how broken, no matter how forgotten, no matter what the world has written next to their name, is worth fighting for. And in a cabin deep in the Wyoming mountains, a man who'd been dead for 6 years sat in a rocking chair surrounded by the 5 souls who had brought him back to life. And he understood, finally and for all time, that this was what he'd been surviving for. Not the grieving, not the emptiness, not all those long, dark years of waking up by himself. This very moment, these children, this family, this was always where the road was heading. He just had to stop long enough to find it. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.